Now, cosmic horror famously is very hard to adapt, granted. There is a creepiness and a sort of being awestruck and humbled.
Insignificant.
And made to feel small in the face of immensity.
Yeah.
There's certain things about cosmic horror that you can pull off in film, and it didn't seem like they were interested in doing that as much as, like, there is some sort of elder god or something in the background, but we're going to focus on, like, this really gory, gross out scene.
Welcome, friends, to episode 248 of the Ink to Film podcast, where we read the book and then see the movie. I'm filmmaker James Bailey.
And I'm writer Luke Elliott.
And this week we discuss episodes 5 and 6 of Guillermo Del Toro's 2022 series, Cabinet of Curiosities. Okay, so Halloween is technically come and gone, but we're still in the horror mood, so we're going to talk about some H.P. Lovecraft adaptations.
I celebrate horror year-round. We talk about this all the time. It's interesting because I feel like you have to kind of say that, because I do think some people view horror as like a very seasonal thing to be into. But yeah, I think that's not the case, and that there's a place for it all the time. And yeah, I'm interested to talk about these H.P. Lovecraft adaptations. Bit of a mixed bag for me. The show's been out long enough that I've been seeing, all sorts of different takes. Trying not to let that affect me too much, but I think as far as like putting it into context, I'm really curious to hear what you think of them, though.
I agree. Ultimately, like we talked last week about how it was so exciting that we were going to get H.P. Lovecraft adapted by Guillermo Del Toro in some way, and how massive of a fan of H.P. Lovecraft Del Toro is. But
I do think we should be clear that he's not directing these,
right?
Because I think I've seen some of that confusion out there. A lot of people who maybe haven't looked into it, and I don't know how you can miss it with Del Toro announcing it at the start of every episode, but still, like, this mood that like every one of these episodes is a Del Toro creation. And I just don't know how true that is, right? Like, he's overseeing it, but how much comes down to the directors?
It really it varies, you know what I mean? Project to project. The only people who know are going to be Del Toro and the directors. And I'm sure he was more involved in some and less involved in some. It's about collaboration and who wanted to collaborate. I think he's probably the type of producer and filmmaker that like is willing to let his artists just like create what they want to, if that's what they're looking for, or collaborate.
Well, I mean, the guy's busy too, right? He's making Pinocchio, he's doing all this other stuff. At the same time this is being developed, so I'm sure it's easier for him to just be fairly hands off, come in, record his little introductions. I'm sure he's like viewing cuts of things and giving feedback and notes. But beyond that, is he on set? I doubt it.
I don't know. It has his name on it, so you never know who's gonna like want their name out there without having some influence over it. But my point in bringing all that up is just that I was expecting some amazing stuff, and I think we got some really good stuff in ways. And then in other ways, there were some things that were kind of a bummer to me in these episodes. I walk away feeling happy that it exists, and I enjoyed myself watching these episodes. So if that like gives you a good idea, like these two H.P. Lovecraft episodes were not anywhere close to my favorite in the series, but I still had a good time the whole time I was watching them. It didn't overstay its welcome, and we do have a few more episodes that we're going to cover on a bonus episode. The ones that were not based on existing short stories, we'll be covering, and I'm excited to see what they do with some of those as well, because I think that can go in some really cool directions.
Yeah, and that'll be over on Patreon, so if you want to hear our thoughts on, what is it, number 1, 7, and 8, we'll be covering over there. And then we'll get a sense of like truly the whole show. I'm going to hold off a little bit on my general thoughts on the series, I think, until the end of our coverage, because I want to weigh in on, where I think each episode stacks up to the to the source material. And then I guess my one general thought I will give here early. I think both a strength of the show is its sort of classic feel, and how it's kind of a throwback series. It's adapting a lot of older material, but at times I think that is also what has been holding it back a bit. And I feel like some people are looking at it and going like, this isn't quite what I wanted. And I'm wondering if it was this general attitude of, we're going to adapt a bunch of classics. I I just want to see. I don't know if we're gonna get another season of this. I hope we do. And if we do, I would love to see 6 or 7 out of the 8 episodes next time be new authors, living authors. There's a lot of great modern horror out there that would feel more timely, I think, and be dealing with topics that are really resonant with people today. And there's something fun about the classics. You get to have like a sort of a time piece, right? Is you're showing a lot of these, H.P. Lovecraft. It's like early 30s. That's fun, and I'm not against some classics. Maybe you adapt a few classics next time too. But I would just like to see more of an emphasis towards modern authors. And if that means Del Toro needs to like be open to reading more modern authors, then maybe he does. I don't know.
Yeah, I will say that this season, and I think he can get away from this. This season did have a sort of a through line of Lovecraftian horror. 2
Lovecraft adaptations. Do we really need 2? Maybe you could have just gone with 1.
But my point is just that, like, even the episodes that are not H.P. Lovecraft stories have the elements of what you could see as Lovecraftian horror.
Oh, absolutely. There's a lot of influence.
And so, like, maybe that was the through line, that it was a little bit too samey all the way through. I think that going forward, if this show does get more, I agree with you. I would like to see some really different kind of stories. I think that it's safe to say that this show so far hasn't been the smash hit that like Black Mirror was, or it's not having the word of mouth, at least, that something like Black Mirror.
I wonder how it stacks up to even something like Love, Death, and Robots.
Well, Love, Death, and Robots started slow, right? And that word of mouth built up. And I think that the animation was a big part of it, as well, as people were like thirsty for more animation. And anyway, it's snowballed, and I think it's gotten to the size it is now. And I'd like to see this show do that in a way. But like you said, there's a barrier to entry that's like, there's a lot of campiness in this. Being able to like broach that as a viewer and be like, is this what I want out of this? Like you said, maybe some people were expecting some more serious horror.
It's also weird for in my opinion, to have an entire series that does seem to have this Lovecraftian thrust, and yet one of the through lines for all the episodes we've seen is, obviously to lesser extent in some and to greater extent in others, but like there's this real tendency towards the gross out and the gore, and like that's fine, but that was something that really seemed true in every episode. Like there was going to be some like big gross out moments, there was going to be gore, and sometimes it didn't fit as well as others. And I would have thought that a series that's tackling cosmic horror specifically, there's so many other things you can rely on there. Like think about Annihilation, or think about other cosmic horror. Now, cosmic horror famously is very hard to adapt. Granted, there is a creepiness and a sort of being awestruck and humbled,
insignificant,
and made to feel small in the face of immensity.
Yeah,
there's certain things about cosmic horror that you can pull off in film, and it didn't seem like they were interested in doing that as much as like there is some sort of elder god or something in the background, but we're going to focus on like this really gory, gross out scene. And that was the main turning points in a lot of these episodes.
Yeah, when I think of Lovecraftian horror, like the gore and the gross out stuff isn't what pops into my mind.
Yeah, that's more of like a slasher thing, or like a creature feature, or like almost schlocky 80s horror. I'm not saying that there isn't a place for this stuff. There is, but I don't know. It's kind of an odd pairing, I guess. But yeah, that's just like kind of general. We should probably dive into these specific episodes here soon. I did want to say we are going to be covering our 4th and final quarterly project for the year. That will be, let's see if I can get my schedule right. We're going to cover a one-off next week. Then we're going to have take a week off for Thanksgiving, where we release something from the vault. And then we'll be back with our final quarterly project. If you would like to get one of your suggestions as a potential, we have a post on our Patreon that I will pin that has comments underneath it. And all you have to do is vote for comments, and the comments are individual project suggestions. You can comment your own, vote for the ones you like, and what we will do is we will take the top 4 or so when it comes time a week before, and we'll release that as a poll. But if you want to get your suggestions in there while it's still sort of a wide open field, now's the time. Go on our Patreon, look for that top comment, and you can comment anything you want. Book and film, please. Not TV, just because of our time constraints. We probably can't do a TV show. But, book and movie, and it will be considered. And then, please look at all the other comments and vote for any that sound interesting to you. And hopefully we can get some good options for this final one of the year.
I'm looking forward to seeing what the audience wants us to cover. So
yeah, I feel like in the past it's led us to some things that we probably wouldn't have tackled, at least when it happened. So that's a good way to use it, right? If you want to like push us towards things that you don't feel like are on our radar, or you don't feel like we're going to choose on our own, or maybe just something you've been dying for us to get to, however you want to do it. It's your choice. Go ahead and vote on that, and then once we get down to the final poll, that will be for patrons only. So if you want to get your voice heard, just join our Patreon.
So the first of the episodes that we covered in the show this week was episode 5, and we're going to keep the format of what we've been doing consistent. We're going to have a timer here. We're going to do about 20 minutes on each of these 2 episodes. The first one being episode 5 of the show, called Pickman's Model.
All right, let's start the timer.
Art student Will Thurber becomes friends with Richard Pickman, whose horrific works of art depicting demons and gruesome scenes mesmerize him. Years later, Thurber, now a museum curator, remains enthralled but disturbed by Pickman's work, suffering horrific dreams. Pickman, now a successful artist, drops in to visit, interacting with his wife Rebecca and young son James. When James also begins having terrifying dreams after seeing Pickman's work, Thurber confronts Pickman. Pickman begs him to come to his home and see his works, explaining that he only ever wanted for the works to be seen. Thurber lights the works on fire and accidentally shoots Pickman, who reveals that the works were not based on imagination but real life and scenes of the future. A demon depicted in one of the paintings emerges and drags Pickman's corpse away. The next day, Thurber is horrified to find the museum displaying Pickman's works completely undamaged and that James and Rebecca have viewed them. He sends the 2 home and orders the paintings destroyed. Returning home, he discovers that the paintings have driven Rebecca mad. She has gouged out her eyes and butchered and cooked their son, just as depicted in one of Pickman's paintings. So this episode was directed by Keith Thomas, and I'll tell you a little bit about him. In 2017, he founded the production company Night Platform and began his career directing, writing, and producing the horror short film Arcane. In 2019, he directed the supernatural horror feature film The Vigil. In December of 2019, Thomas signed on to direct the Stephen King adaptation Firestarter, which was that one that just came out recently.
Just came out, yeah.
In September of 2021, Thomas was hired to direct an episode of Guillermo Del Toro's Cabinet of Curiosities. In February of 2022, Thomas directed, wrote, and produced the music video I Disappear When You're Near for A Place to Bury Strangers album See Through You.
I don't know anything about that group.
Neither do I, but interesting music video. And then in May of 2022, Thomas stated that there are ongoing discussions to possibly expand Firestarter into a franchise.
Oh, wow. And so I thought I heard that movie did not do super well, but maybe I'm mistaken. Plus, I feel like in the era of COVID, it's really hard to know.
Right. It's tough. I mean, I do remember seeing some reviews, and I didn't think it was super well received, but maybe it did well at the box office, and maybe, it got enough viewers to warrant that. But interesting to note how this person is fairly new into the industry. I mean, probably been working for a long time.
This does seem like an up-and-comer kind of talent to me. I do feel like being good at adaptations does seem to be a path for some people in the industry. Kind of get known for that. I mean, look at Mike Flanagan is sort of known and famous for that now, specifically with Stephen King. But you see like Heiserer, right? We talked about writing adaptations and then directing adaptations. So there is some of that going on. Maybe that's what Keith Thomas here is doing. But let's talk a little bit about this, because when we did our episode on the short stories, you said Pickman's Model was your favorite of all the stories we read. Mm-hmm. I said it was right. I think it was my second favorite. It was right there. So it was my favorite of the 2 Lovecraft stories we read at the very least. So coming into it, we're both feeling pretty high on the short story, and we get this adaptation that I'm sure this is something we'll talk about a lot for the next one, but like it's pretty different. Obviously, it's like a reimagining, a changing of a lot of details, an expansion in some ways. Characters have different motivations. We get a lot more with like family life and all this stuff that wasn't really in the the original short story. So, on this podcast, we talk a lot about faithful adaptations, and then we talk a lot about directors coming in and really taking it their own way, and how both can work, but both also, I think, have pitfalls. And sometimes the director coming in and really taking something a completely different direction is the riskier play, because you could potentially alienate the original fans, and then also, if you don't nail it, like the people, like the newcomers might not like it either. Not saying that's what happened here, but I'm just curious to know where you're at based on, the fact that you really like the short story. How did you feel about this adaptation?
Yeah, there are things that I like about this episode, but overall, I think this is the biggest letdown of one of the episodes to me.
Because your hope was so high? It
was very high, and I felt like it was an not easy one to adapt, but
I do think this is a tough one to do.
It was a tough one to adapt, especially because the depiction of this horror was really difficult to nail down. But
you had to make a lot of choices about, like, visually what you were going to show, what this art was going to look like.
In expanding it out, they turned this relationship between Pickman and Thurber into, like, sort of an antagonist relationship. Like, he's kind of a fan of him, but then he's not, and then he's kind of hates him and is like, your work is just ruining my life. And when he goes to the finale, basically, where he goes to his house and he goes down below and he's showing him all this stuff and he's like trying to destroy it, I found it to be less interesting than when he was fascinated by the horrific and was like just haunted by it, but respected it. And then this turned it into this thing that was like, it was just something to be seen as hated. And I felt the idea behind the story being there is beauty in the horrific and there's like more there's something to be said about interpretation of art and a lot of this other stuff that I feel like there was a little bit in this adaptation, but I was missing a lot of that fascinated me in the original story.
The story works really well on a meta level, and that was something we talked about, like the nature of horror fiction and the effect it can have on you, and the way we view the creators of truly horrific pieces of art, and how it doesn't fit into polite society. And like there's all these interesting things being discussed beyond the pages. And that's one of the things we both really liked about the short story. And I agree. I think a lot of that, unfortunately, is absent here. And I don't know how, like, on purpose it was, but because things were taken in sort of broad directions, there's an ambiguity and a subtext that is sort of lacking at times in this adaptation. I think it's still there to an extent if you want to see it that way, but it is just not as clear to me that was what the director was going for. Now, all that is to say, like, I ultimately had a pretty good time with this one, and I slightly disagree with you in the sense that I disliked the next episode more, as far as an adaptation goes. But, I think both do have some things going for them. Ultimately, I was okay with this episode, but I can see where you're coming from like where maybe your hope was for it. And it is kind of a letdown in that regard, because it could have been maybe something truly spectacular. And I think it unfortunately, it was okay. Like, it was a solid episode for the series, but as far as like an adaptation of this really interesting story that has the potential to do so much more, it does fall a bit short. And I think you touched on one of the key things, and that is the relationship he has with Pickman's work. Our main character here, he at first he is intrigued by it, and we see that, and that's right on, right? Like, Pickman shows up in his class, and he's drawing this it's like an anatomical drawing they're all doing of this model. Yet when he sneaks around Ben Barnes, what's the character's name? I'm drawing a blank on it.
Will Thurber.
Thurber, yes. So Thurber like sneaks around and takes a look at what Pickman's drawing, and he sees our painting. He sees this like rotting flesh, and like there's multiple limbs, and he seems intrigued by it. He seems engaged by it. He wants to know more. He's like, this is something truly different and dark and fascinating. I love this from Thurber. I want to see more of this, but unfortunately, I think it immediately got into this like witchcraft supernatural element when he goes to his apartment, and he is sort of haunted by it. He starts seeing visions of this like witch woman
the addition of all of that also I felt was unnecessary and sort of they were almost trying to tie the two Lovecraft like adaptations together in that way, and I didn't think that was necessary. I didn't appreciate it. It was just, it turned what was supposed to be the horror of the story was supposed to be this work, and like at the end it's revealed there's demons, but then you add in like witchcraft and things underneath the ground like earlier on, which was I think there's a little bit of it in the story.
Yeah, but it's more just like texture.
Yeah. To have him seeing witches and like smoke monsters and things.
It's it's very on the nose. Like there is something darkly magical about these paintings, and it is like cursing him to look at them. And that I'm okay with that implication and that subtext, but leave it as subtext. Don't make it the text. And like that's what happened here. It's like that's what's happening. Now, if you want to view this as like the effect of viewing disturbing art and like the way that can sort of alienate you from polite society, or maybe the sort of a desensitization that could happen, like a metaphor for that, like that all, but that's the subtext now that you have to seek out versus being like the main thrust, and then the subtext being that maybe something supernatural is going on. It's just like a reversal of those two things as far as their emphasis. And I do think it suffers a little bit for it. We do get this time jump, and we get Pickman coming back later. And you're right, he does have this like semi-antagonistic, maybe just full-on antagonistic relationship. He shows up, and he's sort of like delighting in the fact that he's showing his art to his son, to Thurber's son. And it seems like he is deliberately cursing the family to an extent. And that was a little weird for me. Like, I like the idea of this like haunted artist in Pickman, but who's maybe a bit disturbed. But the idea of him truly being an antagonist and like coming after him in a way, it feels weird.
It doesn't feel like there's motivation for that. Like, why would he go about doing this?
He does say at one point that like he seems like he respects his opinion, and he wants him to view his work because he respects his opinion.
Why would he come after him then?
Focus on that. I think that's interesting, right? Like he's someone who hasn't had a lot of praise or people who understand his work. So he's like, oh, you actually understand me. I want you to come see this. That's more interesting to me than like this weird, like, I'm going to force you to do it. Like, you have to come view this, or I'm going to, and then I'll agree to leave your life and burn my work. Like, he had to make all these agreements to get him to go. I don't know. It's strange. Ben Barnes is like, is an interesting guy. I think he's well performed here. It's just the writing, I don't know.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. Actually, Crispin Glover, I did like the performance out of him. It was a weird accent, which it was supposed to be like Northeastern, I think.
It was weird, right? Like it was very hammy almost. And it played into that change to the character to make him a little bit more cartoonish. And I'm not sure I love that choice. I do think it was a choice. But yeah, I
like the performance, regardless of the writing that was in this episode. I thought that Crispin Glover gave like some interesting depth to this character, and it was creepy and weird, and pulled it off well. And Ben Barnes was pretty good as well.
They had this effect they would do when he'd view the paintings, where everything would start shaking, and you'd see like the creatures would sort of move and lurch within the paintings themselves. What did you think of that effect?
I actually thought that was a good way to, because we were talking about like how do you represent this horror, and how do you represent like how it seems like it's alive and scary and everything, and like to have it moving, I'm like, okay, good choice there, because that works in a different way than just a stationary lockdown shot of a painting that looks kind of scary. So I appreciated that. I thought that was actually pretty effective. And honestly, their depiction of like horrific stuff like was just enough for me. It didn't feel lacking in the story.
Yeah, ultimately I think the art was okay. There was a weird choice. This is another example where I'm saying like sometimes the show kind of gets in its own way and goes too far. At one point, Thurber is having this dream, which, side note, there's maybe a little too many times of something spooky happens and then a character wakes up and it was a dream. You can only play that card. Like, I would like to just see it maybe once. But once you've done it once in an episode, don't do it again.
Well, not to mention all the episodes seem to have that going on also.
There was a lot of it, yeah. But anyway, he has this dream where he walks into the living room and he sees the feast. And the feast is of this like person. Like we hear that this is like the ancestors of Pickman, and she ate her like husband or something, or like served him at a feast and a sacrifice. That's fine. And I was even okay with there's like the crab legs and stuff that looked like they were like almost like there was like squid or like octopus, so they were going a little bit Lovecraftian with it. But then there was also like cockroaches crawling all over the place, like it seemed rotted. That's the thing where I'm like, you don't need to do that. Like the idea of serving up a human being as a feast is already horrific. You don't need to add in a bunch of like cockroaches crawling out of it. I don't know. It's like, to me, that's almost going too far. And it sounds weird, but like truthfully, like sometimes like pull back a little bit and let the horror be what it is conceptually, rather than the horror of showing a bunch of scary shit rapid fire.
It takes away from the person, right? You're like, oh, gross, they're eating a person or whatever, and then they're like, oh, gross, there's bugs. And if you just have a person there you're left to think about, oh, they're eating a person.
Right, like if they had been eating a meal that looked like a meal like you could actually eat, but then all of a sudden it's revealed it's a person, that's horrific. Like think about Hannibal does this like really, really well. Like, you know, Hannibal, he like does fine dining of like human beings. And so there's something like disgusting and stomach churning as you realize like the food looks appetizing even though you know what's in there, but instead, yeah, they just look totally insane. They're eating rotten food. There's cockroaches crawling over the table. Like that's so beyond like something you can even imagine someone doing.
It's like a haunted house, right?
Exactly. It's going back to that like really broad horror, and yeah, that's the kind of stuff. Again, I just want you to back away from it. It's kind of going a little bit too far, trying to do too much.
We only have about 3 minutes left. I want to talk about the end also.
Yeah, we got to talk about the end. It's the big reveal. It's the big scare. It's the turn. It's a lot of stuff.
And this comes back, it threads back in that witchy stuff where all along it's this curse of the witch or whatever, his family's been cursed and they drew these things that would happen and they would curse people.
There's sort of an unclear sequence at this art display where I wasn't sure, like, was this Pickman's big gala? And if so, why did Thurber go there with his family to view the art?
Well, the art was supposed to be destroyed, right?
Yeah, but he took his whole family there to see it. And then, like, I don't know, it was just weird. And then, like, it was unclear whether or not what happened with his friend who had, like, cut his own face, did that really happen? So I kept coming into the, like, is Thurber losing his mind? Because his wife sees the painting and she's like, oh, yeah, this is fine, no big deal. But he is disturbed by it. So there is this, like, potential for it just being that Thurber is losing his mind. That's interesting to me. And I like that ambiguity, and I want more of that ambiguity. And I think the ending pushes it way into the supernatural zone instead.
I think the ending makes you think that he did that actually in the gala, like that he did cut out his eyes.
Exactly. It's like that's all real. It's all been happening.
And so the idea of having a haunted painting that like you're haunted by and you don't want other people to see it's like The Ring, right? You don't want people to view the tape or whatever. Like that's scary on its own, but then you start adding in like
everybody's seeing it and getting affected by it. It's almost scarier if you're the only one getting affected by it, because then you have everybody looking at you like you've lost your mind. And
so ultimately it comes down to the wife is like cooking the son and she's gouged out her eyes. She's gouged out her eyes, which looked, I don't know, kind of hokey, right? Like I know it's a tough effect to get the like hollow eyes. It looks okay, I guess, but it takes me out of it a little bit. In a better story, it wouldn't have bothered me at all. Yeah, she's so like, she seems to be able to see. Yeah. Which doesn't make sense. Like, that's the kind of stuff that bothers me, right? Like, if you're going to do this, at least play it straight, and she shouldn't be able to see. Her eyes are gone. But you've taken it into such a supernatural zone where she's almost like, I wasn't even sure if this was really happening. But then the implication is it is, because we don't get any other, like, we don't get any signal that maybe this didn't happen. Like, we end on the head in the oven, and that's the end of the episode. So it really happened, I guess. And we just think back to how the short story ended. It ended with him, like, so he and Pickman sort of, like, Pickman fights off this, whatever this is, and it's, like, an unknown thing, and then Thurber, like, gets out of there, and he's, like, reciting the story back to somebody. And and the end of the story is that he's seen all these horrific things. The reveal is that who the model really is, or that the model is a real thing. He can't, like, words can't express how terrifying it was, yet he's trying to. I do think this is a story that inherently is going to work better written because of the, as we've talked about, like,
the imagination. It engages with your imagination so much and asks you to provide all these details. Whereas in a movie, it's like you have to make decisions and you have to show stuff. Or it's going to get frustrating because it's just going to be a bunch of people looking at paintings that we never see, which would just be frustrating.
Right, yeah. All right, the timer has gone off, but the idea of the end of the story, you're leaving it off, and the horror is like there's something out there that hasn't been addressed, and there's things out there that we can't understand, whereas here we like kind of saw that with this demon like dragging him down below, but it hit a little different than I was hoping.
Yeah, and Pickman at the end, he almost had a moment where he was like, oh, I just wanted you to look at my art, and like it tried to like back off the antagonistic thing to where we actually felt kind of, I don't know, bad, but like just like maybe he didn't deserve to get shot. But like it didn't work because they had shown him to be such a villain throughout. I didn't care.
And the reveal obviously of him, rather than him telling us like he does in this adaptation, he's like, by the way, this is what's going on. The demons are all real. Everything's real. And then he gets dragged down. And in the story, there's something more eloquent about like him seeing this scrap of paper, realizing it's a photograph, and then like sort of inferring that, okay, these things are real.
It's not so on the nose, right? Like we're getting our hands held through all of this as they're trying to do this reveal, which like is not that, you know what I mean? Like it's obvious when the freaking demon comes out that it's real. It did look cool, by the way. I like the design of that final demon with the big eyes.
The creature design and some of the effects, and that's not the problem I have with this show. Not that not that I have a lot of problems, but I feel like they did a good job of nailing down a lot of that stuff.
So yeah, before we leave this episode, and I know we're going to do our final ratings at the end, but just like I thought it was okay overall. Like I had a decent time watching it, but there was a bit of a letdown as far as like what I feel like could have been achieved. Not to say it wasn't a high level of difficulty, because I think it was, but it just didn't quite get what could have been a truly great episode.
All right, so episode 6 is called Dreams in the Witch House, and I'll start my timer. Walter Gilman witnesses his twin sister Epperle's spirit be dragged away upon her death to the forest of lost souls. Years later, as a grown man, he seeks to enter the location in hopes of saving her. He rents a room in the house of an executed witch, Kezia Mason, and takes an indigenous drug designed to take him to the forest. After several attempts, he locates his sister and even finds that he is able to bring a piece of her dress into the real world with him. His attempts gain the attention of the spirit Kezia and her familiar, a human-faced rat, Jenkins Brown. When Walter successfully brings Epperle back, they learn that Kezia and Jenkins have also come back, and that Walter must die before dawn in order to bring one of them back permanently. Kezia attempts to kill Walter, but Epperle kills her and peacefully passes away herself. However, Jenkins takes advantage of the situation and burrows into Walter's body, bursting forth and killing him before dawn. He then possesses Walter's body triumphant.
I think it's Keziah, but yeah.
Keziah, sorry. All right, so this is directed by Catherine Hardwicke, who is an American film director, producer, designer, and screenwriter. Her directorial work includes 13, which she co-wrote with Nikki Reed, the film's co-starred, Lords of Dogtown, The Nativity Story, Twilight, Red Riding Hood.
Wait, like the original Twilight films?
The original Twilight film,
She directed that?
Yep, in 2008.
Wow, okay.
Red Riding Hood, Plush, Miss You Already, and Miss Paula.
I haven't seen like any of those, to be honest.
Oh, really? There's a few. Yeah, there's a few in here that I've seen. Lords of Dogtown, Twilight. Hardwicke became a production designer, working with film directors such as Cameron Crowe, Richard Linklater, and David O. Russell. She was influenced by them, gaining experience in their techniques and learning informal aspects from professional conversations. She talked to some about her desire to be a filmmaker and received advice and tips. While working with such big-name directors, she was able to study their techniques. Quote, I always told them I really want to make my own movies, and they were all very generous and gave me tips, end quote. Her career as a production designer was crucial and beneficial to the molding of her career as a director. Her time spent with these directors aided her and were able to give her a sense of direction. Quote, as you're riding around with the director location scouting, you hear a lot of conversations and you start piecing them together. So I think that helped me, end quote. She even worked with fellow female director Lisa Cholodenki on her film Laurel Canyon in 2002. Aside from her time spent working alongside directors, Hardwicke continued to work on her own projects such as scripts, short films, and teaching herself Final Cut Pro. Hardwicke even took it upon herself to take acting classes to become a better director. Through the 1990s and early 2000s, Hardwicke worked as a production designer on films including Tombstone, Tank Girl, 2 Days in the Valley, The Newton Boys, Three Kings, and Antitrust.
I have seen some of those. So one thing I want to get out of the way here before we get into it properly is that I was frustrated to see a adaptation of H.P. Lovecraft, which we've talked about. He's sort of an infamous author. He is well known for his contributions to horror, but also well-known bigot who had a lot of racism, not only in his works, but in his life. And we see this adaptation come in, and I thought it was really unfortunate that several racist tropes are brought with it and introduced to the story that weren't even present in the story itself. The spiritual guidance and spiritual assistance by the people of color to our white main character throughout, it's a trope that has been well analyzed. Spike Lee coined the term magical Negro trope when talking about this. And you look at the other painter who's in the house. You look at the nun, and then even this indigenous person who's like providing a spiritual journey to him. All of these tropes are uncomfortable, and it's weird to see them all crammed into one story, and then even weirder that isn't in the original story. All of that's added.
Well, this story is completely changed.
Completely changed.
They took like about 1% of the source material in this case, and I mean, to be fair, probably like 10%. But even so, it ended up being a totally different story. As an adaptation, I think that it missed the mark because there's so much different that it's almost inherently a different story. And then on its own, if I was just to see the episode, like you've said, there are some problematic things. And then you get this sort of almost Pan's Labyrinth sort of esque story where there's like this magical forest thing.
I'm just uncomfortable comparing this to Pan's Labyrinth because how much better Pan's Labyrinth is.
I just mean like this idea of like a portal with like a magical world behind it.
Yeah, I get where you're going. Kind of up these woods that are kind of like almost like purgatory is my read on it.
Whereas the original story was like he's in this house and it's a portal and a gateway to like
another dimension,
cosmic things and crazy entities
where there are elder gods and like
exactly. Yeah. We didn't get a lot of that.
No, very little. This just seems very much like the afterlife, which is a very different kind of thing than this multi-dimensional travel.
And when she gets brought back, she's called a ghost, and yeah, it really is just afterlife.
Okay, so yeah, let's talk about the sister. That starts off with the death of the sister in a scene that I thought looked pretty hokey. All of a sudden, she's standing there. She's this like semi-translucent but kind of solid girl, who's looking at herself and going like, "Oh, I guess I died." And the reactions from the actors as they're looking, these kid actors as they're looking at each other, it's just, I don't know. I didn't buy it. And then she gets pulled out of the house and like into this forest thing. And then it sets up for this journey where he's going to be searching for his sister. And I thought, okay, he's got a motivation that's driving him to seek out the supernatural. And I assume this is going to lead him to the witch house. Okay, I'm fine with that. But he needs to get caught up in something so different than what he wanted. Because the witch house to me was, this like interdimensional space. And instead it becomes like a portal to the afterlife. It's all about his sister. He brings her back across. She looks the same as she did early, as far as like being the semi-translucent ghost who at times has some solidity to her. All of that just didn't work for me. I didn't think it looked very good. I didn't buy it. And it isn't what this story's about, so it always felt like a weird fit. And that's really the heart of the story.
I mean, it's turned from a story where this is like this academic who's in an attic and he has to find a room, and
he kind of just is staying there because he can't afford anywhere else, right? Like, and he's like kind of curious about it, but
and then his roommate or colleague or whatever, they're like talking about some of the stuff that is theoretical, and then it starts to become real for him in his dreams.
It's all about like the multiverse theory and like he's studying whether or not it's real and that you could have a multiverse, and then like the house really comes into play and it starts backing up some of those theories.
And they introduce, and there's this idea that like maybe the witches were able to tap into some multiversal thing, but it's not like in this story, it's just like afterlife, like we've talked about. And then they introduce this weird drug. The idea of introducing this drug and having him go to like these drug den areas where he's taking it is taking away from the fact that the portal is supposed to be the house. Like if he's going there,
he can go to the forest just from taking the drug. The house doesn't seem to matter, except for it has the witch in it, I guess.
But doesn't he see the witch just by taking the drug, or is it the first time he sees the witch in the house?
I think the first time he sees the witch is when he's in the house, because she comes. Now, I will say the witch at times looked really good. Like the moment where he first takes the drug, and she kind of comes out of the shadows, and you just see the two eyes sort of glowing. I thought all that looked great. And the show continues to look good. And in defense of the director, or at least like some accolades I'll give her, is I thought the show visually, or this episode visually looked good. Like there was some really interesting uses of color, like sort of like a cold and warm. Like you'd get a lot of blues, but then you'd also get a lot of oranges and fiery colors, and like in the same frame. And I thought so. At times, I thought it like looked really interesting. Old Ron Weasley, it was good to see him again.
Rupert Grant, yeah, I love Rupert Grant.
Yeah, he's got this like white in his hair now, and like I thought he did a good job. My problem was not his performance at all. I do think it's sort of interesting that instead of it being Brown Jenkin, they switched it to be Jenkin Brown. And I wonder if that was because they felt like it was a racist thing to call him Brown Jenkin. And that's the kind of thing where I'm like, that small change you made is so like surface level compared to like using a racist trope, which you would then introduced into it. So I just think it like missed the mark in that regard. And then like Brown Jenkin Brown, whatever, he has no place in this story anymore. He makes no sense. Why is he there? When that started happening, like the world of the story had not explained what this was or why it exists. It made no sense. And then like to have him be the like big villain, where the reveal at the end is that he's puppeting our main character like a fucking kaiju.
So
what?
we started the story and he's like, "Don't worry, this will have a happy ending," and all this stuff, and we're getting like a narration over the beginning. And then like that's all to set up this like joke that they have at the end where he's like puppeting this person. He's like, "See, I told you it's a happy ending for me." Basically.
Yeah, just such a bad way to end. I didn't think we were gonna get the chest burster, so I was like, this doesn't make any sense anymore in this story. Like we've completely changed what the story's about. That shouldn't happen anymore. But sure enough, it does. So that's like this weird thing where it's like you've changed everything else about the story, yet you felt like that's the one thing you can't change. So you do it, but it doesn't make sense anymore from the story that you've made to have that happen. We don't know how he got in his body. It gets never really explained. Is he a real thing or is he an imaginary thing? Like we don't know. And none of it's really explained.
And I said earlier that the creatures overall in the whole show look great. This is probably my least favorite of all of them. Did not look very good.
I want to give a little anecdote. I was watching this episode with my wife, and she does not watch horror, right? But what she does occasionally do is she'll be like doing the dishes, she'll be like walking around, doing something around the house, and then I'll have something on, and sometimes she'll get sort of drawn in by it, right? Like, oh, I'm kind of curious, oh, is that Ron Weasley? Oh, interesting, like that kind of thing started happening. She took a seat next to me and was watching the opening of this episode, and this was early enough in the night to where she could have finished it out, but she's watching, and I think it's interesting, it's intriguing her, it's drawing her in, and then that fucking Jenkin Brown shows up, starts talking, starts running around. She's like, what the hell's that? Like, that's weird. And then, like, within a minute or two of him showing up on screen, she's like, yeah, I think I'm going to go get ready for bed. And then she just gets up and walk away. And, like, that was the thing to me where it's like, that was the turnoff. It was like, this was an interesting thing, and she was drawing her in, and then that comes in. It makes no fucking sense. It looks kind of bad. He's talking, and he sounds weird. He's like almost kind of a jokey character. I don't know if we're supposed to be afraid of him or laugh at him or what. His connection to the witch is unclear. Like, what is any of this?
I also think just in general, that's a good point of reference for there is a little bit of intrigue in the story, like you said. The beginning's a little weird with the daughter dying, or the sister dying, but there's an intrigue of like him trying to tap into the supernatural, and that the first like third of the episode draws you in. And I think that was the right time to check out, because it ultimately just starts like pretty quickly just careening downhill.
Yeah, that told me something about this episode, right? Like, it's not welcoming to people who don't know anything about H.P. Lovecraft and haven't read the story and are not big fans of horror. Totally doesn't interest. It's just there for the story. Period. That was the only reason she was getting drawn in, and then it lost her. And to me, like, I know the story, so like I have a built-in interest, and I'm trying to see what they've done with it, and like so I'm going to stick around, but. Ultimately, I think her reaction was probably the right one, which is, I don't need to watch this.
And that speaks to somebody who's, like you said, not there for the H.P. Lovecraft part of it. I'm curious what you think about H.P. Lovecraft fans seeing both of these adaptations. Let's talk about how we think people feel about these.
I've seen a range now. Like I said, it's been long enough to where I've seen a bit of from both sides. I have seen some people who liked it. I've even seen some people who said this was their favorite episode. I wonder if some of it comes down to, like, it looked good, Rupert Grint was there. Some people thought, like, the witch was really scary, and there was some moments where he's, like, paralyzed that I did think were really creepy. But I am more in the camp of this isn't a good adaptation of H.P. Lovecraft, and I'm not the biggest Lovecraft fan, but I know some big Lovecraft fans are out there saying, like, this isn't even an adaptation of this. And I totally get it. Like, it really isn't. It's almost like loosely connected to the story, but even that, like, it totally misses the heart. And that's something we talk a lot about on this podcast. Like, if you are going to adapt something and change it, we like it when it still feels like at its heart the DNA is the same, or something, some building blocks were authentically chosen and then organically made out of the source material. And this just doesn't do that for me. So one thing we talked about in the story, and it was kind of a criticism, is that too often the story would do this reveal of like, oh, these dreams are actually happening. But that's saying to me that the core of this story is kind of the like question of whether or not our main character is hallucinating, is losing his mind, or if this stuff's real. All that ambiguity is gone here. Yet, the story tries to capitalize on that in a way that I don't think it can, because of the nature of the reveals. So, what I'm getting at is he has this friend character who I actually think is very interesting. Is an interesting character. He's a skeptic who has been along the journey with him, and his sort of reveal is like, I've never seen a ghost, yet I've been there with you all along investigating this stuff. You have this core memory where you saw something happen to your sister, and that to you is proof. That can be an interesting dynamic if the story itself isn't so firmly in the camp of the supernatural being real. So because it's so firmly in that camp, like, that's like, I just know he's going to be proven wrong. So I'm less caught up in it. Whereas, and like, he's looking at him, he's like, oh, you're taking these drugs and you're hallucinating, you're seeing things. Okay. Like his skepticism is warranted in a world where the supernatural may or may not be real. But in this world where it's so clearly real, I'm less interested in this storyline and this sort of reveal of him at the end where he's like, oh, I guess this stuff all is real. Like, the story doesn't agree with that in a way. It's like, of course it's real. Like, we've been watching it unfold the whole time with no ambiguity about it.
Yeah, it was also, just a side note, interesting to see this actor pop up again, because I think just seen him for the first time in Rings of Power.
Oh, yeah, you're right. Okay, that's who that is. His face was so familiar. I was like, who is this?
It took me a little bit to figure it out, but
okay. Yeah, I thought he was good. It felt to me like the story didn't know what it wanted to do. It tried to do a little bit of everything, and it just didn't all come together. And ultimately, I also didn't feel like the director liked the story that much, because there seemed to be no attempt to take what was working about that story and what people love about that story, and made it famous and replicate that in any way. It was more just like, yeah, I'll do an H.P. Lovecraft adaptation. People will watch it, and I'll just do my own thing.
My timer just went off here.
One side note, if there's a giant patch of leaky black mold on the ceiling, maybe don't put your bed right underneath it.
Yeah, right.
It's probably not the best place to sleep every night. You maybe slide that bed over if that's where it is, right?
Probably want to move out in general because that black mold infestation has gotten pretty bad.
Yeah, that's the true horror. That's
right.
See, like if there had been an implication, maybe they're all just fucking like hallucinating based off of this black mold. That would have been interesting.
I thought that that black mold was going to be like the same substance as that thing that he was taking, that the drug that he was taking. In some way, I thought, and I was like, all right, that's going to tie it together.
It's just this like set dressing of like gross and creepy that this show does so much throughout all of its episodes for the most part,
right?
That I'm not as big a fan of.
We've now covered all of the adaptation episodes. In our usual way, we're gonna pick our which we thought was better, but we're gonna go episode by episode. So let's start with the first one, Graveyard Rats.
Kuttner, I believe, was the author, and then we got this episode 2 here. I wasn't a big fan of the story. Also wasn't the biggest fan of the episode. I guess I'll give it to the episode, though, just because I thought there was a few things to like in there. The short story left me wanting in some ways. I don't know. This is a tough one just because I wasn't a big fan of either. But yeah, I'll give it to the episode. It edges it out for me.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. Both were fine. I will also go with you and pick the show just for the fact that they added a little bit of this interesting eldritch god under submerged temple and
super campy.
It knew what it was doing. It was funny enough. It was, I think it's not for everybody, but I'll take the adaptation in this case. So the next one is The Autopsy.
You start off on this one.
Yeah, this is probably going to be the hardest to pick for me. I'm going to take the adaptation. I thought that there was things that I missed in the adaptation, but overall, I think this stands tall as one of the reasons why this show should exist. And they do a really good job of capturing the helplessness, and they do a good job of capturing the grotesque that was in the story. And overall, I thought it really captured what the story was trying to tell. And great performance by F. Murray Abraham, and just good direction overall, visually interesting.
I agree with all of that. I agree that it was a good adaptation. I think it's maybe the best, although I really like the next episode. But as far as like a faithful adaptation that nails it, this was a really good one. I think it's got the strongest source material, and you didn't like try and go away from it. You didn't run away from the story. You like leaned into it. You did the thing. So all the props for the adaptation, but I'm going to give it to the story just because it was my favorite of all the things we read. And I had such a good time with the fiction, and I thought it was so well done that even though this is my favorite adaptation, it just doesn't feel right for me to not give it up for Michael Shea or Shea. Still not sure how to say that name. But yeah, I'm gonna give it to the story, but it's damn close, and I'm not gonna fault you for that one. I'll start off on this next one. I think this is one where I'm going to give it to the show because I really, really liked this version of The Outside. Emily Carroll's webcomic, Some Other Animals Meet. Cool story. I like the webcomic fine. I do think it was very short and it left a lot to the viewer to sort of interpret. This was a more complete story to me, more dynamic. That stab scene is gonna stay with me. It's still that might be my favorite scene from this entire show. Is just as far as like, it's gonna stick with me. It's so good. Maybe my favorite performance too. From our lead here, Micucci.
Kate Micucci. Yeah.
Kate Micucci. She was so good. So for me, it's gonna be the show here. Even though I did like the story, but yeah, it's the show. This is my favorite episode, I think. As much as I liked The Autopsy, it's kind of a 1A, 1B. This is 1A. This is my favorite.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. I'm taking the adaptation in this case. I thought that the webcomic, like, I love the visual medium of comics, and I thought that it was a really cool way to represent it in the way that you can use webcomics to be its own kind of comic strip, like in sort of a scrolling fashion. Amazing art. The art was like incredible, and I'm definitely going to go back to visit more of Emily Carroll's work.
Yeah, I'm going to read through that book we got because a lot of those look really cool.
Right, but overall, this Anna Lily Amirpour adaptation, and I'm not surprised that she has one of the best episodes. It's got such precise vision. The performances are amazing. It looks incredible. It was just, all in all, it was one of the best episodes.
It's the standout of what we've seen, and it feels the most different. It's based off the newest material. This is the direction I want to see this show move in. I want to see more. I got season 2 that's more in line with this kind of stuff.
Yeah, I agree.
I will say one thing I've seen a lot of interesting pushback on is people who don't like this episode because they didn't like the main character. And this is almost like a big conversation you can have about horror in general and likable protagonists. But the one thing I will say is, I'm not accusing people of this, just as a general statement, there is a sense that women main characters need to be likable, and that doesn't apply to men. We are used to seeing unlikable men as our main characters. We are not used to seeing unlikable women. And sometimes you will get very strong visceral reactions from people who maybe don't even realize what's happening, who don't like something. They hate it because they don't like the woman at the heart of it. And I agree, this character is not likable. She's weird. She makes bad decisions. She is ultimately the villain at the heart of it. Like, you could argue. I agree with all of that, yet I still love the episode because I'm okay with an unlikable main character, and I think we should be more open to them being women in a way that maybe historically we haven't been.
I totally agree, and we talked about some of that last week as well when we covered that episode.
Let's keep our snake draft thing we're doing here going, and I want you to weigh in first on this next episode, which is going to be the Pickman's model.
Sure, Pickman's model. We talked about it a lot this episode, and I think a lot of my reasoning is in there. But I'm going to take the source in this case, the original H.P. Lovecraft story, and it just comes down to like how there's more subtlety to it. There's more to dig into, and I like the relationship of the characters more. The way that like he stays true to the fact that he still thinks that this person's a fantastic artist, even though he's haunted by this stuff. And the reveal I just thought was more interesting. And you know, there's some good things in the episode, but overall, I'm taking the original. I'm
with you, man. H.P. Lovecraft fans out there who maybe are frustrated with me over the years, you know, kind of shitting on H.P. Lovecraft, even though I hadn't read him. This is the story that made me understand some of the appreciation people have for what Lovecraft is able to do in his fiction. This is the story that makes me feel like I'm actually interested to read some more Lovecraft in the future. I liked this story a lot. I thought the adaptation wasn't as bad as our next episode. I think this is the better of the two Lovecraft adaptations, but ultimately it falls shy of the story, which I think is superior. So yeah, giving it to the story. And then I guess I'll start off on this last one to continue our format here. This is a tough one, Dreams in the Witch House, because I didn't like this story a lot. I do think it shows the Lovecraft mythos in a way that is interesting, right? Like to get to see how he does these multi-dimensional gods. But it wasn't my favorite, and I felt like the reveals were redundant. It went on a little bit too long. So ultimately, I didn't love the story, but this adaptation I thought was a failure, ultimately. So in that regard, I got to give it to the story that at least had some things going for it. So I'll give it to the story here.
Yeah, I agree. After reading Pickman's journal, going into this next story, Dreams in the Witch House, I was excited about what the possibility of an H.P. Lovecraft story could be, and it was just fine to me. I there wasn't anything that really struck me as like wildly influential or very interesting.
His way he describes the unknowable, the ineffable, the things you can't put into words, right? That word we got from Good Omens. That is the thing that shows to me really well in Dreams in the Witch House.
Agreed. And like getting to see what it's like in these dreams and like being around these entities. Yeah, that's definitely the thing that stands out to me.
I mean, we had like sentient pyramids and like starfish people and like lots of weird ass shit in this story that none of that's in this adaptation.
Overall, the story just came down to, I guess, not be that satisfying. But then, yeah, you get this adaptation and it's totally different, and not that it needed to be the same, but it's totally different in a weird way, and it's trying to hold on to certain things that it doesn't need to.
Yeah. It's about this weird trying to save a ghost and bring her back to the real world, and like you just knew it wasn't going to work, so there was no real conflict there. It's like, of course it's not going to work. I think ghost stories can be really interesting in this regard. And this kind of story, if it's about like the ability to move on and like be at peace, and metaphorically, like the challenge of dealing with grief as a human being is an interesting topic, but none of that really comes through here. This is about a guy who's trying to take his sister out of the underworld and bring her back to life in a way that makes no fucking sense. Was she going to get granted a new body? Like, I don't, none of this makes sense to me.
I thought at one point he was going to swap his life for hers too. And I was like, that seems like it could make sense in this sort of story, but that didn't happen.
Yeah, no, this doesn't work. We'll give it to the story. Okay, man, that's going to be the end of our coverage for Cabinet of Curiosities. Mixed bag overall, but, we had some fun with it. We are going to announce our very next project at the end of the episode, so stick around for that. If you enjoyed our scattershot, interesting style of coverage, if you enjoyed our use of the timer, which is a new thing for us, let us know on social media, but also let us know in the form of a rating and review on whatever app you chose to listen on, as that continues to be the best way to get the word out and to sort of elevate us in the rankings out there.
Also, be sure to connect with us on social media. We're on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, all of those at Ink to Film.
Yeah, still hanging on at Twitter for now. Going to be curious to see if this website, it's almost too big to fail, which is an ironic term, of course, because things that are too big to fail often do. And I'll be curious to see if it can weather this chaos that's on there right now. For those of you who are on the app, some wild shit's been going on over there.
Well, it depends on how if free speech is upheld or not. It's like the fucking owner now is kind of a loose cannon, and he's not standing by his morals.
Yeah, if you make fun of him, you're banned. Right. Free speech is now legal, except for where Musk's concerned. Anyway, also, if you wanted to support us on Patreon, we are patreon.com/inktofilm. That's where we'll have our episode talking about the other 3 non-adaptations from Cabinet of Curiosities. That's also where you're going to be able to vote on our upcoming quarterly project, so that's the place to be, and we'd love to have a few more supporters on there. We could definitely use your help in keeping this thing running, keeping our lights on for the podcast, so check it out, see our different tiers. We'd love to have you there.
And thank you to Dylan Owen for the use of our intro and outro music.
All right, the only thing left to do is to announce our next project. We are going, by design, we are trying to move in a completely different direction, do something wildly different. There was a movie that came out in the 2000s called The Illusionist with Edward Norton. I remember seeing this in the theater and liking it, but beyond that, I can tell you very little about it, and we found out it's based on a short story. So we're going to combo that. We're going to do a little combo coverage on it and revisit The Illusionist to see if it still holds up.
Yeah, let's see if it has any magic left in it.
Well, and that ambiguity, I remember it being like that was something that this movie actually did well. So it'll be interesting by comparison to talk about doing ambiguity right. So hopefully that'll be fun. And if that's a movie and a project that you're interested in, hopefully you join us for that. And until next time,
keep adapting.